The Quiet Voice. The old Victorian house on Chestnut Street was the town spook house. It had been empty for decades. Even my dad could not remember the last time someone had lived in it. Apparently, the house was tied up in a spiderweb of family inheritance laws, and thus the house could not be lived in, sold, or torn down. As a result, it was the idol of obsession for generations of kids. Sneaking into the house, or at least trying to, became a rite of passage. There were rumors the house was full of stuff. I don't believe there was any malicious intent, only simple curiosity. Local legend, passed from child to child during campouts and sleepovers, said old Victor Tolliver was a strange man, reclusive and sour of disposition. In a small country town, the primary community activity besides football is going to church, and Mr. Tolliver was always absent on a Sunday morning. In a town that could boast 7 or 8 various houses of worship, he did not darken any door in town. Mr. Tolliver had inherited the great house from his mother Elizabeth. She was a much-loved figure in the town. Elizabeth was the widow of Ransom Tolliver, the lumberman, and he built the house, and when he died at the relatively young age of 50, he left her the house and a sizable fortune. Elizabeth spent her time doing good, heading many of the town's charitable projects, giving freely of her time and money, and was considered something of a town saint. How Victor Tolliver turned out the way he did was a mystery. When Elizabeth died, gossip began brewing. I suppose people kept it all in defense to Elizabeth. According to town gossip, when Victor was 15, there began a series of gruesome crimes. People's pets were turning up mutilated, crucified on pieces of scrap wood, set up at the various doors of houses of worship. After 6 months of these morbid goings-on, Victor was arrested as the culprit, red-handed. This was literally the case, as he had been found in the old abandoned warehouse where his father's company used to store lumber, elbow deep in Mr. Jerry Henry's collie named Duke. Apparently he had taken the friendly dog to the warehouse and killed it, and drawn a chalk circle around it. Victor spent a season in the Trans-Allegheny Mental Asylum and came back in late summer. He did not return to school and rarely went outside the home, and when he did, he wore all black and spoke to no one. From then on, however, whenever there was some local disturbance, the police would pay a call to the Tolliver house to inquire of Victor's whereabouts. Then there was the murder of Mary Tomlin in 1920. She was found on a clear spot on Turnabout Mountain, stripped naked and stabbed, her throat cut, strangled, and shot in the head. Police immediately went to the Tolliver house and took Victor down to the station for a chat, but he came up with a reasonable alibi. The murder caused something of a sensation. The story suggested a rowdy little sex club and blackmail. A handyman was eventually convicted of the murder. Later, Mary's grave was desecrated and her body went missing. People still believe Victor Tolliver was involved. Various urban legends sprang up about driving up Turnabout Mountain and experiencing various supernatural phenomenon, and even encountering Mary's ghost. It was late June when we got the idea of going to the Tolliver house. Sadie McCleary had brought a Ouija board, and we were excited at the prospect of trying it out. The impetus of our final decision was the local paper had run a series of articles about the crime. It was me, Stephanie Mears, Chuck Blondell, Marion Tobbit, Christopher Davis, Cheryl Ramey, and Sadie McCleary. The girls told their parents they were staying at each other's houses, and the rest said they were going camping. After church, we went home to change and pick up what we needed and headed to Hadley Creek, where we set up camp. We went swimming in the river inlet and cooked hamburgers and hot dogs, and then began to get ready for our outing. We all put on dark clothes and tennis shoes, and Sadie had her Ouija board and candle in a bag. We climbed into Chuck's truck and headed back to town. We parked the truck on a side street about 6 blocks from the Tolliver house. I have to admit the house was scary. At one time you could tell it was beautiful. It was a classic Victorian house with a small round turret-like tower, a fish-scale tin roof, and a gingerbread details that were once painted white against a rich dark barn red. Now it looked as though it was suffering from some form of cancer, leaving gray patches behind. The first floor windows and doors were boarded up, but the second, third floor weren't, and you could see where the windows had been broken or cracked. The house had a deep wrap-around porch, and there were pine trees on one side of the house, and 2 old oaks on the other. We made our way carefully into thick pines and around the back of the house. With foresight, Christopher had a crowbar, and we would need it to get through the back door which would enter into the kitchen. He carefully levered the boards off, and I set them aside quietly, and we went in. I hesitated. Something was telling me to just stop, turn around, and go home, not to go inside the house. In the end, I went in, shutting the door behind us. The kitchen was clean, no dishes or pots and pans tucked into the once beautiful cabinets. The counters and floors were covered in a thick dust, and there were cobwebs all over. We took out our flashlights, Chuck having a large square one, run on one of those huge batteries. We noted that the windows had been painted with a thick black paint, which made the house darker than dark. I silently thanked Sadie for reminding us to have flashlights. She always thought ahead. With nothing to really see in the kitchen, we moved into the informal dining room. There was a round white table with 4 chairs around it. There was another built-in cabinet that would have held the plates and teacups and saucers and drawers where there might have been the cutlery. There was a sideboard against one of the walls, and above it a painting. I would have ignored it if it had not been for Chuck. "Holy shit," he exclaimed. We all turned, and several beams of light swung around, and we saw what he was seeing. The painting might have been a sylvan idyll, a meadow scene showing deer coming to feed. Someone had painted a red-skinned goat-like creature in the center of it. At its cloven feet was a nude woman inside a circle. "Jesus Christ," breathed Sadie, hitching up her bag on her shoulder. "That is one sick son of a bitch," said Christopher. "Guys, maybe we shouldn't do this," said Cheryl, fear creeping into her voice. "Come on, Cheryl, it's just a weird house. We'll check it out, and then we'll come back here and do our seance," said Chuck soothingly, putting his hand on her shoulder. We headed into the formal dining room. The large square table was very nearly on its side, as vermin had chewed through a couple of the legs supporting it. There were chairs around it and a thick, heavy drapes at the black-painted windows. There were 2 corner cabinets on the north wall, and Sadie and Marianne were looking in them. Unlike the cabinets in the kitchen and the informal dining room, these cabinets had things in them. In one there were books with curious titles like The Black Poulet, Rites and Rituals of the Black Mass, Satan Arisen, and other assorted morbid titles. The other cabinet contained jars of what appeared various herbs and roots and things preserved in cloudy, putrid liquid. On into the living room were two ancient settees. They were upholstered in faded fabric, now shawled in thick cobwebs and dust. There was a large, low tea table and a freestanding brass bird cage. Sadie peered into it, and there lying on the floor of it was the skeleton of a large parrot, long dead. It suddenly seemed as though I could hear whispering voices, as though we had come into the end of a gossipy conversation. I turned to the large fireplace. It was very ornate, with a heavy carved mantel. The center of the mantel was a large carved head with wavy, unruly hair, and horns, and a lavish smile, and lolling tongue, and pointed ears. Faunus. It was a popular design element in Victorian homes, said Sadie. Doc Campbell has one over his fireplace. Betty doesn't have anything like that over his fireplace, said Chuck, shining his flashlight onto the painting above it. There we saw a painting in very ornate, gilded frame of Elizabeth Tolliver and her son. That would not be remarkable except for the fact they were naked and she was cradling Ransom Tolliver's decapitated head in her arms. Please, let's just go. This is more than just freaky. It's sick, said Cheryl. Her voice sounded even more frightened, maybe even panicky. It's just a painting, said Chuck. Come on, let's just get through the house. We should tell someone, said Miriam. Oh, I can see us now, explaining to Chief Markham how we were going to creep around the local spook house trying to find the perfect place to hold a seance with Sadie McClure's Ouija board when we discovered the local legends were actually secret Satan worshippers or witches or something, said Christopher. The sooner we get through, the sooner we can do our seance and get out. The sooner we will have one hell of a story to tell everyone. Christopher led the way and I got between the girls and Chuck was bringing up the rear. The staircase was creaky and there were some soft spots, but we made it to the second floor. The doors seemed to go on forever in the flashlight beams. Christopher opened the first door, which was merely a bedroom, completely emptied out except for the bed, with a stripped mattress. I went to the door on the opposite side of the hallway and opened it. It was a bathroom which had been beautiful once. It had a large sink and counter and a toilet, with the old-fashioned tank and a chain flusher. There was a very large cast-iron tub on lion feet legs. The walls, however, were graffitied with arcane symbols in which looked like blood. The floor was the tub, was coated in it, dried now. I opened another door and it was another bedroom. This one was well furnished with a canopy bed, dressed now in tattered lace curtains tarnished with age. I moved around and parted the curtains with care, shining my flashlight. There, laying on the bed, was a skeleton dressed in clothes that reminded me of the Great Gatsby we'd watch in Miss Hanson's lit class after we took the test on the book. Hey guys, I think I found Mary Thomas, I said. They filed into the room and looked at the beautifully dressed body. That dude was a sick bastard, said Christopher. Marion looked down, and on the bedside table was a book. It ended up being a journal. She began to read. I brought Mary home. Everyone thinks she was murdered because she was having affairs with important men in town, but she was really a sacrifice to the demon my mother worshipped. He has now finally found me acceptable. So despite all her goodwill and charity work, Elizabeth Tolliver was a Satanist. They kept it all in the family, said Christopher. 2 more rooms to go. Let's go, said Chuck. The next room was Elizabeth's room, made up in what was very beautiful furniture and linens that were now tattered and rotted. On the pillow was a skull. It could only be Ransom Tolliver's skull. We stepped out the door into the hallway at the last door. This would be Victor's room then, said Christopher. He opened the door. The entire room was painted black, not just the windows. Even the floors were painted black. Upon the walls and floors were several elaborated chalk circles with words around them in what appeared to be Latin. There were stumps of candles around the circles and puddles of cool wax. Even the ones around the walls had painted black candle scorns around them. What were these circles for? Asked Chuck. They are doors. See this word port? It's Latin for door, said Sadie. A door to where? Asked Christopher. See this word? It's inferno. Hell, said Marion, pointing at the word. Please, let's go. You said if we looked in all the rooms we could go, said Cheryl. Hey, check it out. A book, said Christopher. Porta de Pandemonium. We didn't have to rely on Sadie's Latin. The book was Doors to the Demon World. We have one more floor, the attic, then we go to the police station and tell the chief what we found, said Christopher. We went to the narrow door at the end of the hall and found it was locked with a slide lock. Chuck slid back the bolt and opened the door. The stairs led up into pitch darkness. Carefully we mounted the stairs, the airs turning downright frigid. Our breaths came out in puffs of steam. I must confess I felt a shiver that was more than just the dropping temperature. My skin broke out in goose flesh. What are they doing, keeping the body cold? Asked Chuck aloud. I jumped at the sudden sound of his voice. Funny you should ask. Mary is downstairs. Elizabeth is up here. There, seated in an old wooden chair, like a throne, was a skeleton. Let's do the seance here, said Sadie. You said we could leave, said Cheryl. We are almost done. We'll do what we came to do, said Sadie. Grab that tea table and bring it here. Since we know where everyone is, the only one not here is Victor. She unshouldered her bag and pulled out the Ouija board. It was not very impressive. It was just a piece of cardboard printed with the usual design and a plastic planchette. She laid it on the table with the planchette and pulled out her candle, the aroma of patchouli wafting into the room. I got this from Purple Haze. She lit the candle and we all gathered round the small table awkwardly, and we put a finger on the planchette. She read from a printed card. Spirits gone on, we call upon Victor Tolliver to speak to us now. I have to say the girl who I have known all my life looked different in the candlelight. They all did. Christopher looked mean and lustful. Sadie looked hard and whorish. Chuck looked stupid and boorish, like a bully. Marion, suddenly snobbish look on her face. Cheryl looked spoiled like a little kid who was not getting her way. Wait, what was happening to me? I grew up with these people. Wait, what was happening to me? I grew up with these people. Cheryl was easily the smartest of us. She helped me with my social studies project. Marianne and I lost our virginities to each other one New Year's Eve. Chuck and Christopher were best friends. Sadie was our organizer, putting together every party, reminding people what to bring. Suddenly I wanted to be away. Damn it, I don't think this thing is working, said Sadie. I know, let's use one of those spells or rites or whatever. We can just substitute Victor's name where it says demon, said Christopher. I don't think we should do this, guys, I said. Why not? Asked Cheryl. I think it would be fun. You wanted to leave when we saw the first picture. Now let's go to the police right now. I was terrified. I knew there was something wrong. I knew there was something going on with my friends. I could still hear something like a quiet voice in my mind. Felt as though it was trying to urge us away. Sadie was organizing the room. Chuck had found a piece of chalk and they were discussing which circle to draw. Chuck looked at me, frozen in sudden fear. If you're that much of a coward, get the hell out. Run home like a little baby, he said. For a moment I thought Chuck might hit me. I turned and left and ran out of the house. I didn't live that far from the house, so I did indeed run home. My mom and dad were surprised when I came home. I made some excuse that I really didn't care to sleep in a small tent with Chuck and Christopher, and asked them to drop me home when they went on a run to the store. I went to my room and changed into a t-shirt and shorts and got into bed. I lay there in the soft light of my room and decided to go to the police station and talk to Chief Markham. Chief Kyle Markham was a large, beefy man. He was big-boned, and though he was not muscular, he was not fat. He stood there in his pressed khakis, his belt and holstered gun, and looked at his watch when I asked if I could talk to him in private. He nodded and I followed him into his office. The story I told him in the bright sunny day sounded like the most amazing piece of fiction. The chief sat there impassively as I spoke, sometimes jotting something indecipherable on a pad in front of him. After I finished the story, he just got up and told me to follow him. He poked his head into an office and asked Martin, his deputy, to come with us. We got into his patrol car and took the short ride to the Tolliver house. I led them around to the back door and they went in. It was all just as I told them, and Martin, who had grabbed his police camera and the crowbar on his way out, began photographing the rooms. We went upstairs and I showed him the rooms and the journal with the entry about Mary Thomas and the room where Victor had drawn his circles, and finally when we came to the attic door. Chief Markham tried the door and it was locked, but his deputy had his crowbar and pried the door open. The first thing to hit us was the smell. I'd gone deer hunting with my dad when I was 12, and I remembered when he opened up the deer's belly and took the insides out to field dress it. It was a strong, minerally, coppery scent. The next thing I noticed was the heat. Last night it was freezing cold, but here in the morning it was hot as a bake oven. The final thing I noticed was the buzzing sound. It was not like the low whispering of the quiet voice I had heard. It was growing intensity. We made it up our way up the stairs. What we saw will haunt us all our days. In the light of their high-powered policemen's mag lights was the most horrendous scene. In a haze of buzzing flies, a circle had been drawn on the floor with the words in Latin all around it. Outside the circle were the heads of all my friends. Beside their decapitated heads were their left hands. Each a candle had been burned in their palms. Their bodies were sitting around the room, naked except for the torn, ratty piece of fabric wrapped around them like togas. There were bites and scratches on all of them, all over their bodies. In the center of the circle, in the dust, was a cloven hoof print. Martin, get the kid out of here and call the state police for their crime scene truck and call Doc Spurlock and tell him to get out here to the Tollivers and tape off the scene, said the chief. Now, Martin! He sort of shoved the deputy towards me and he grabbed me and we halfway stumbled out of the house. Afterwards, there was a coroner's inquest. They had searched me, my house, my car, to see if I was the only one who killed them, and then they had given me an official statement. I was decidedly not guilty, though I am sure the gossip suggests otherwise. My parents sent me to live with my Aunt Debbie and Uncle Wallace on their farm, and I stayed there till I graduated. I returned home and went to work in the library. I spent most of my time reading about the occult and the devil and true crime and writing everything I learned in a series of notebooks. I still live on my parents' property in the little house they converted into a guest house. I'm not married, and I sleep with my light on, as I have every night since I came home, leaving my friends in that house. After everything that had happened, they tore down the old Tolliver house. Under the house they found an old root cellar, and there they found a couple dozen bodies. 2 or 3 of them were locals, the rest they may never know who they are. People used to stare at me in town, and every now and then I'd get a visit from a kid on the high school paper, or the local newspaper, but I turned them down for interviews. One day, Martin, old Chief Markham's deputy, came to see just before he and his family moved to his new job as a fingerprint analyst for the state police. We sat in my little kitchen alcove and drank coffee. We didn't make everything available to the media. There were some details we just couldn't make public, said Martin. What details? I asked. Like the fact that there was DNA that defied identification. Like the fact that there were foreign hairs on the bodies that were identified as some sort of goat. What do you think they saw? Said Martin. Through the look on his face, told me he knew what I was going to say. They saw a demon. I don't know if it was the devil, but they saw what was in that picture, I said. He nodded and finished his cup of coffee. I want you to have these. It's the journal and the spell book your friends had that night. I don't know why. Surely nothing good can come of it, he said, handing me the books. Thanks, I said. Maybe nothing good can come of it. I sat there with those books and realized I could hear those soft, quiet, whispering voices again. I put the books on the shelves and went over to the little nook where my bed was. I slipped my hand under the mattress, pulled out a stiff piece of cardboard and a piece of plastic. I ordered it online, just a cheap one like the one Sadie had that night. I went into the kitchen and opened the utility drawer and grabbed an emergency candle. I put it in a candle holder and sat down at my kitchen table. I had it in my head that I might be able to help my friends if I could contact them. Maybe I could get them out of hell. Now, with that spell book, I can design my own circle, and they could come back through and move on. I sat the plastic planchette on a cheap board. Sadie, are you there? I said aloud. The planchette began to move.